You know, they say that life imitates art, but what happens when life decides to dictate fantasy? Well, folks, I think we're about to find out with Metaphor ReFantazio. Fellas, we are back at it again, cause thank you Atlas and Sega for sponsoring this video and providing the Xbox review copy. The game is available now, and there's even a hunky demo that carries over your save progress if you want to try it before you buy it on your preferred system. You know, the moment this game was officially announced back in the day, I knew it was guaranteed to be something special, cause if there's one thing Atlas is really good at, it's altering my brain chemistry with an exceptionally long RPG. And fellas, the pleasure centers of my mind are at max capacity with this. Honestly, the most difficult part about getting this video out to y'all in a timely manner has just been pulling myself away from the game to spread the good news. Real talk, this isn't so much of a review as it is a PSA. Play Metaphor, y'all. Try it before you buy it with a demo, but if you like anything that you see here, my biggest advice is to just savor this experience. But to get edumacational for the need-to-know folks, what is Metaphor ReFantazio? Well, to read from this nifty little press briefing they gave me, let me just put my glasses on real fast. From the creative minds behind Persona 3, 4, and 5 comes Metaphor ReFantazio, a unique fantasy world where your protagonist will journey alongside his fairy companion Galaga to enter the royal tournament and lift the curse from the kingdom's lost prince. Control your destiny, face your fears, and awaken magical archetype powers that lie dormant in your heart. Strengthen your bonds and build your party to take down powerful foes and discover the kingdom's true nature. Also subscribe to SuperButterBuns. Wow, can't believe they put that in there. That's crazy. Of course, that's the cookie cutter way to describe this thing. My alternative description would be...
You want to be on top?
Who wants to be America's next top monarch? But it's sure that the Persona daddies were the one who birthed this RPG baby, and boy howdy does it show. Like, if you played anything from Atlas within the last 20 years, then Metaphor will be familiar in many ways, but also incredibly fresh, because the intent of this game was to create a new mainstay series that fits comfortably on the Atlas champion belt, and this baby knows how to body slam, y'all.
Oh my God!
In fact, the devs themselves seem very confident in this game, considering how eager they are for people to try it with the demo and the extensive marketing campaigns leading up to release. They spared no expense, cause I normally talk about these games for free, but shout out to Atlas and Sega for speeding up the inevitable. Metaphor ReFantazio for beginners absolutely on the agenda now though. This is a hunky, long, refined game that exceeded my own expectations in a lot of ways. Like, I'm not personally a big fan of traditional fantasy settings, but Metaphor managed to deconstruct the popular tropes and rebuild it into something beautiful and incredibly unique. So let's yap about it. What's the premise and how's the story? So in the United Kingdom of Uchronia, a magical medieval land made up of many tribes and races, the king is suddenly assassinated, Maverick style, which throws the whole nation into a chaos power vacuum because there ain't no heir to the throne. Now you play as John Protagonist, an 18-year-old close confidant of the only prince who is actually alive, unbeknownst to the public, because he was stricken by a sleepy bitch disease curse over a decade ago. So he's basically as alive as a cucumber is sentient. But your adventure begins with the protag on a top-secret mission to lift the prince's curse by taking out the one who cast it, the power-hungry, conniving, handsome Count Luis, or as I like to call him, Griffith 2. Initially starting off as a simple assassination ploy, things quickly escalate into Uchronia's next top monarch, cause the late king actually had a very elaborate failsafe in the case of his untimely death. Using the omnipresent power of the king's magic and a scary massive stone face in the sky, he leaves it up to the will of the people to choose their next monarch, in a 100% raw psychic democracy kind of throwdown. With the influence of the authoritative church, eventually things evolve into a royal tournament for the best, brightest, and most brutal characters to duke it out for the throne. The protag's main objective is to save the prince above all else, but in order to get closer to Count Luis, he enters the tournament with the support of his comrades who all share a similar vision of an ideal world, and who also want to see Count Luis dead, cause most of them are Prince Sleepy Beauty stans too. So in your bid to win the throne and lift the prince's curse, you go on a traveling adventure through the nation to conquer the other competitors, rally the people, and help anyone in need. And on top of all this wannabe monarch power grabbing, the kingdom is being tormented by humans, the real monsters, whose origins and intentions are unknown, but that ain't stopping them from being an existential terrifying threat in every situation. Now for spoiler reasons, I'm gonna withhold some details, but because this is a fresh new fantasy world, there is a lot of exposition in the beginning, both shown and told, to make sure you understand how this world works, from the major players and their political dynamics, to the general population's histories, cultural norms, infrastructure, technical and magical limitations, travel logistics, and most importantly, how discrimination is cooked into everything.
Filthy gremlin like you. What you got in the capital?
It takes a few hours for the plot to warm up for sure, but once the introductions are out of the way, the premise has a sharp hook with high stakes. There are several caveats to the king's magic and Count Luis's power level that complicate and thwart easy loopholes, so it makes the means of winning the throne more interesting and thoughtful as the competition evolves. The pacing is great too, as you don't linger in any place for too long, with the twists and turns being frequent, shocking, and sometimes hilarious. But this adventure has every type of trope I love mixed into one. Contest, comrades, convoying, and capping motherfucker, all accentuated by a vast colorful cast of characters with their own motivations for pursuing the throne and or helping the protag with his mission, like Heismay for example. I love you, but rather they are absolute power-thirsty pricks, dogmatic dipshits, humble hungry knights, or eat-the-rich boobalicious baddies. Everyone's got good energy and dynamic personalities, plus one very sad, confused child. But the many different walks of life make for interesting conversation and confrontations as each member of the main cast gradually learns from each other's perspectives, with the added fun of picking how you respond during most discussions. Now, the persona parallels are incredibly apparent for anyone familiar with the series. Like, yes, there is a social link-like system where growing bonds with characters is imperative to your supernatural power growth, referred to here as archetypes, and this game even has a boots-down-the-house, beret-wearing, turtleneck-serving realness Igor with a cat. So the power of friendship with some mystic mumbo-jumbo is once again a factor, but you got a duty to do. So these bonds grow in relation to the common goal of potentially ruling a country one day. So we ain't got time for romancing. We have a popularity contest to win and a status quo to overthrow. So despite the bright high fantasy veneer, Metaphor gets super sad and morbid very often, and a lot of the heavy-hitting topics can be attributed to the most interesting aspect, the narrative framing, because you see, Metaphor is a metaphor. The sledgehammer comes swinging for that fourth wall the second you fire up the game by asking specifically what your name is, not John Protagonist's name, you, the player who is playing this game. But throughout the story, the protag constantly references and reads from his handy-dandy fantasy book. That's very reminiscent of our reality, assuming every altruistic ideal of the modern world was perfectly implemented. It even goes as far as asking new party members what they think of this fantasy novel, often with them highlighting how different and utopian it sounds from their harsh, segregated reality. So Metaphor wants to make it as clear as humanly possible that it is a metaphor for society. It's a story designed to observe and dissect real-life woes and societal ills through a saturated fantasy lens, and provoking you to imagine your ideal world as a virtuous monarch, since ideas and fantasies are the seeds that eventually grow and manifest our reality. As the saying goes, every aspect of civilization is technically made up. The real question is, whose imagination are we living in? And why is it Larry the Cucumbers? It's politically charged in the sense of moral philosophy, trying to get to the root of why certain worldviews form on an individual level, and challenging the player to question what a true happy utopia looks like, and if it could ever be practically implemented given the chaos of the human condition. It's so heavy-handed, it's almost adorable, and it completely avoids the pretentious allegations from just how earnest it portrays its message. And this meta-framing immediately adds a layer of mystery, trying to figure out where it's going with all of this, and that intrigue builds as the world reveals its true nature. But even without the meta-narrative framing, this is a lush, vibrant, fleshed-out world begging to be explored and understood. In fact, this game is a massive love letter to all things fantasy. It's got a little bit of this, a little bit of that, while wrapped up in a traditional fantasy garb with a little steampunk throw in for good measure. It's obviously inspired by other works, but Metaphor takes all of these known tropes and concepts, puts it in a blender, deep fries it, and serves it with a flashy garnish to make something new, and it's frankly delicious. So that's what you can expect from the story, but it's how you navigate and fight your way through this adventure that'll keep you locked in. So once again, similar to Persona, Yeah, this game uses a calendar system where the story progresses day by day. The narrative's twists and turns will constantly bring up new objectives and missions, normally with a hunky main scenario dungeon to complete in the allotted time. But within these big deadlines, you are free to pick and choose how you spend your days. Rather it be growing bonds with your comrades, taking on bounties, helping the locals with their petty problems, or expanding your virtuous domain by doing a series of random activities, such as cooking, cleaning, reading, laundry, playing chess, taking baths, mechanical engineering, public speaking, bungee jumping, or just listening to people yap.
So we moved to LA. My father gets a job at the Palm restaurant. My Uncle Junior works there, who is a Jehovah's Witness, believe it or not.
To name a few, there's actually an absurd amount of different ways to spend your time, and the general story deadlines are pretty generous, so you won't feel super stressed trying to see and do everything in a given area. Major cities are akin to open zone hubs with shops and taverns that you are free to run around in or ride your sword through. Yeah, that's right. You can ride your sword like a skateboard in this. High-key, best game ever. Atlas, give the person who came up with this $1 million right now. But because of the tournament premise, eventually this adventure goes gallivanting across the globe in your hot rod gauntlet runner. Absolutely love these things, and they're giving Howl's Moving Castle a run for his money, you bloated hunk of bolts. This mechanical beast is basically your home base on legs that you'll be using to navigate the world by picking locations from a map. Luckily, there is a teleporting feature for places you've already visited that's actually explained within the narrative's context, funny enough, so it makes the means of backtracking super easy with no time wasted. However, new destinations can take a few in-game days to reach, so you'll often spend the travel time hanging out with the party, sightseeing, and winding down in the evenings camping. I frankly adore this kind of design structure because 1, it makes the world actually feel immense with just how much time it takes to trek the land, and 2, it gives off massive RV road trip vibes. So the fun is within the journey and the destination. So a huge bun seal of approval for just how it handles this. F it, have a trophy metaphor. I love camping and convoying so much. But what I love even more is whacking and smacking my way through enemies, and Metaphor brings the gameplay loop catharsis to a whole new level. Using a combination of real-time action and turn-based combat, how it works is that while running around on the field, you'll be able to swing freely at any target in order to gain an advantage on the enemy. And once you decide to initiate the battle, then it flips over to a turn-based encounter. From here, you use the power of your archetypes to fling magic and melee attacks until you win, followed by a quick little rewards goodie overlay, and boom, you're back on the field to do it again in order to gain experience and gradually grow your party. Of course, the intricacies of combat go beyond that because Metaphor's gameplay is a hybrid of previous Atlas titles' ideas. So it ain't just turn-based, this is press turn, baby, SMT style, meaning if you're able to land criticals or hit an enemy's weakness, then you only use up half of a turn, allowing you to get more moves in and potentially wipe a whole encounter without the enemy taking an action. But on the flip side, the enemy can do the same exact thing, not to mention if you accidentally miss or hit an enemy with something that they block, then you'll lose turns. So you have to think critically about each move, and also take into consideration the party's formation, as you can freely move members to the front line or back line to min-max accuracy or mitigate damage. Basically, how you set up your party is pretty imperative to your success on the battlefield, and the archetype system is how you develop their skills. Surprisingly, not similar to Persona, it's actually more akin to Digital Devil Saga's Karma system, where my embryon babes at can I get a whoop whoop? Anyway, throughout your journey, you'll gain and be able to unlock new archetypes. These cool-ass chrome manifestations essentially act as different job classes, such as Knight, Thief, Mage, Gunner, Cleric, and a bunch of others. Assuming you have the points, you'll be able to freely switch any party member to any archetype, and even carry over abilities from different classes. Also, depending on the party's archetype combinations, you can synergize powerful moves together.
Crazy girl shit, gonna go spring breakers.
The gameplay and story are intuitively weaved through this because the access and growth of your archetypes are directly linked to the bonds you grow with the characters during your downtime. Modern Persona married the social sim and combat mechanics for sure, but now Metaphor has moved into a house and started a family. So there's a ton of flexibility with how you build your party, almost to an overwhelming degree, I'll be real. But the best part is, even though you are limited to 4 party members in a fight, you can switch them out for others mid-battle. Now the catch is, you can't switch archetypes mid-battle, so preparing for fights in advance is really the key to victory, cause good lord, Metaphor is kinda tough, y'all. Seriously, I'm a pretty seasoned Atlas gamer at this point, and I played on normal to gauge the difficulty, but but standard encounters range from a walk in the press turn park to, oh god, I've made a huge mistake. I kid you not, every time I got ambushed, I either gasped or said out loud because it really hurts to start a fight on the wrong foot and it will likely lead to a quick death. So because it is rather punishing, having efficient archetypes or at the very least a varied skilled party is kinda crucial. Like healing is super important in the beginning, so I didn't feel super comfortable experimenting with setups until I maxed out the cleric after the first quarter of the game. So it does take a while before the full variety and flexibility of the archetype system can be utilized. Although, once you get into that groove, the general flow, speed, and progression of the combat is super fun. And even when things get repetitive, because this is a long game, there are frequent special encounters and circumstances to keep things lively, like having to end a fight in only 3 turns, or enemies having unique resistances, or how the daily weather affects the press turn properties. Not to mention, the main bosses are these big showdowns that sometimes have cool gimmicks that differentiate them from normal tough enemies. Now, the main scenario dungeon designs are pretty simple, mainly varying in aesthetics and some quirky navigation stunts. They're normally a series of open areas, corridors, stairs, ladders, and a few hidden rooms you get through crouching. Pull a lever here, open a door there, and use the map markers to reach your destination at the end of the anus. But occasionally it throws a curveball at you with some brief stealth sections, a frantic running sequence, or a countdown clock before disaster strikes. So all in all, Metaphor feels like a true evolution of all of the iconic gameplay mechanics of past Atlas titles, and these are further refined through the sheer amount of quality of life features. We're talking things like retry options mid-fight, no game over if the main character dies, scanning to see the enemy's threat level, the run button is toggled, not held, more experience if you don't take damage, and weakness insights through the professional gossip queen informants, along with a bunch of other stuff. So future RPGs, please take note. The less tedious bullcrap between me and the fun parts of your game, the better. Now moving on to the sights and... Gosh, what's in my... Now moving on
to the sights and sounds. Just look at this thing. Metaphor is full maximalism 4DX out of the kaleidoscope ass. Like holy cannoli, these overlays. Holy these transitions. You know, modern Atlas loves their intense color theory, usually settling on 1 or 2 main colors as the backbone of the theme and aesthetic, but Metaphor is literally all the colors. Every inch is oozing in color and brushstroke-like textures, but the logo and the protagonist are strutting a noticeable crisp white, which juxtaposed beautifully with a saturated rainbow throw-up. I can understand if this hyper-stylistic presentation is overwhelming on the eyes though, especially in combat, where you got magic, numbers, and fancy transitions flying everywhere. So it does take some getting used to it, but it prints into your brain and definitely stands out. However, there is some artistic trickery at play here, like how the air is low-key filled with magical fiberglass at any given moment to cover up the lack of detail in some areas. So when you take away the overlay glitz and glamour, you're left with some flat-looking 3D models and environments with distracting outlines, like Stroll's coat trying to hypnotize from afar with those strokes. But the 2D character portraits look fantastic. The only issue being that when the character 3D models are in full view alongside the portraits, and you catch a glimpse of the uncanny palette bins mouths that stretch just a bit too far for my liking. The general art direction is pretty spectacular though, especially the backdrops and scenery. With each new major story destination, you're greeted with a vibrant variety of aesthetics that feel culturally distinct from one another. However, some of the side missions reuse the same catacombs or nature setting with a different layout, so it's not 100% unique all the time, and you can feel when those corners are being cut. But a notable part of the presentation is just how often fully animated cutscenes pop up. I was legit surprised by their frequency and quality. Like, hello, budget! We've upgraded from the occasional cutscene treat to an essential food group here, adding to the game's consistently inconsistent conglomerate of styles. Although the most outlandish part of the looks has got to go to the enemy designs. You got your traditional fantasy monsters and goofy-looking baddies, but the humans in particular are next-level gruesome and uncanny. We're talking Bloodborne level of limbs, eyes, and an impractical amalgamation of anatomy plastered in a Claire's eyeshadow palette. it. Several enemies made my jaw drop with just how creepy and strange they look. I can't be showing too much because I don't want to ruin the surprise, but one of the bosses straight up looks like if the Protopet from Ratchet and Clank Going Commando was possessed by an American Girl doll. One of the reoccurring aspects of a lot of Atlus games are the monster designs, since many entries share the same pool of demons, so obviously the monster artists have been sitting on insane ideas for a decade, and here they are, jammed into one game. But what ties Metaphor together is the sound, and sometimes tunes speak louder than words. Get a load of this. Talk about an addictive earworm that I never got tired of hearing and got me doing the shoulder shuffle while playing. In fact, the only benefit of getting ambushed in combat is hearing the other combat soundtrack. These battle themes are epic, rhythmic, and the intense, fast-paced, Esperanto-inspired chanting brings them to a whole new level of unique. Outside of battles, though, the soundtracks fluctuate between dynamic strings, somber orchestrations, and fun little melodies which play beautifully alongside this fantasy land. Although, for you Persona fans, there will be some instantly recognizable sounds, like the battle start sound effect. It's literally identical, but what's not identical is that the protagonist can speak, like fully conversationally speak.
Let's enter this tournament for the throne.
And it makes sense since he's more than your typical self-insert protag, but it is a little jarring each time he replies in full sentences since I'm just not used to that in my Atlus games. Of course, the general performances for the rest of the characters are great, with a huge variety of dictions that are audible indicators of the character's social class and background. There are a lot of great hard-hitting voice lines and quips too.
Your words verge on treason!
Against what ruler, Blue Blood? The dead cannot be betrayed.
Hi, it's me, you're all in danger.
The only real downside is most of the bonding hangouts aren't fully voiced, which I do find disappointing coming off the heels of P3 Reload. But the game makes up for it in subtle ways, like how there's a frequent lush narration during the traveling transitions that articulates the status of the party and some tidbits about an approaching destination.
But the miners were hardy and spirited, and the promise of riches lured many here.
Oh, that's smooth. Anyway, to wrap it up, I was excited for Metaphor out the gate simply because it was something new from Atlus. They have been riding the high for the last 2 decades, refining their established series and occasionally throwing a small curveball out there, but it's been a pretty similar song and dance for a while. Metaphor not only proves that Atlus can make something wholeheartedly new, but use their staple formulas as a framework to deliver something special, thought-provoking, challenging, and most of all, fun. This is the most meaningful of Metaphors, using every angle of its premise to hit home the message that through the power of imagination, community, and compassion, can a more hopeful and equal reality be forged. Experience it for yourself, y'all. Metaphor ReFantazio is available now. So until next time, gamers, toodles!